Since the mid-1970s, the Group of Seven has operated as an incredibly exclusive group of advanced democracies. But look closely at their recent gatherings, and you'll find a strict exception to their own rules. India is not a member of the G7, yet they have been invited to sit at the table every single year since 2019. The G7 relies on its exclusivity. It is an informal steering committee with no binding treaties, designed strictly to coordinate policy among advanced industrialized economies. So why do the world's wealthiest nations increasingly rely on a non-member to execute their global agenda? To answer that, we have to look at the group's origins. The G7 formed in response to the 1975 oil crisis to align macroeconomic policies among non-communist powers. Over the following decades, the group expanded its scope, dictating terms on global security, climate commitments, and technological standards. But their economic leverage is fading. In 1989, the G7 controlled nearly 70% of global GDP. Today, they hold roughly 44%. As their economic share drops, the collective wealth of emerging markets is surging upward, crossing paths with the established powers. That mathematical loss of absolute economic dominance means the G7 can no longer dictate global outcomes on their own. They were forced to look outward for survival. The first strategic reason the G7 looks to India is the democratic premium. As the world's largest democracy, India provides a vital, values-based counterweight against an increasingly assertive and authoritarian China. But the G7 also suffers from a deep disconnect with the developing world. Aggressive Western sanctions and strict climate deadlines often alienate poorer nations trying to secure affordable energy and reliable supply chains. India steps into that gap as a translator. They actively advocate for the needs of the Global South directly to the leaders of the world's wealthiest economies. Without India sitting at the table, the G7 lacks the geopolitical legitimacy required to enforce its agenda in developing regions. India is highly aware of its leverage. They use these summits to secure massive infrastructure investments from the West. This map illustrates the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, or IMEC. It is a massive G7-backed trade route designed specifically to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative. That proximity also grants India lucrative technological cooperation, securing agreements on artificial intelligence standards and semiconductor supply chains. If the relationship is this mutually beneficial, why doesn't India accept a permanent seat and form the G8? The barrier is partly structural. India's per capita GDP remains far too low to meet the rigid entry criteria of an elite industrialized group. But the barrier is also strategic. India actively avoids formal membership to ensure it is never bound by Western military alliances or collective security declarations. By keeping its status as a permanent guest, India extracts maximum economic value from the West while perfectly preserving an independent foreign policy. To see that independence in action, look at the G7's direct rival, the BRICS bloc. This chart compares the core strengths of the two groups. The G7 maintains deep political unity, but a shrinking economic share. Meanwhile, BRICS boasts massive growth, currently holding roughly 35% of the world's GDP based on purchasing power parity. But the chart also reveals a severe limitation. While the G7 relies on NATO-backed unity, BRICS lacks mutual defense pacts and remains heavily fractured by internal rivalries. India is the only major global power that holds significant active influence inside both of these competing blocs simultaneously. They are the ultimate geopolitical swing state. India uses BRICS to push for a multipolar world and uses the G7 to secure the capital needed to thrive in it. Can the G7 survive as the world's steering committee without changing its formal membership rules? The group is transitioning from a coalition that simply dictates policy into a coalition that negotiates for it. Modern global governance no longer relies on isolated, exclusive clubs. It requires fluid, overlapping strategic partnerships to function. The G7 remains the economic anchor of the West, but they understand they cannot navigate a multipolar 21st century without India reading the map.